Manufacturers of
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
fine
Assalamu
gold
alaikum wa rahmatullahi
and
wa barakatuh.
diamond
Once
jewelry.
again, as we welcome our listeners, our views on the various platforms of Salam Media on this morning's edition
Salam
of
Media.
News as we document the lives of many out of the British-Palestinian Academy. And the reason for that is we are
Unity
enjoying the
sets the
company of
agenda.
Dr. Azzam Tamimi, a British-Palestinian who is in South Africa, a guest of PIN, Palestine Information Network. And we express our gratitude, our thanks to Maulana Ibrahim Musa for bringing Dr. Azzam Tamimi and allowing us this opportunity for this interview. Now, obviously, this comes at a very, very critical time, considering the genocide that is unfolding in Palestine and in Gaza, and looking at the profile of Dr. Azzam Tamimi, very well placed. He is the chairman of the London-based Al Hiwar TV channel. He acquired his PhD in political philosophy from the University of Westminster in London, and since published several books, which include Hamas Underwritten Chapters, Hearst London, and also Rashid Ghanouchi, Democrat within Islamism. We're talking about Islam and secularism in the Middle East, power sharing Islam, liberty for the Muslim world. He writes and lectures on issues relating to Islamic political thought and Middle Eastern politics, and also a co-founder of Al Hiwar TV channel in 2006. And we are honored to have you here, Dr. Azzam Tamimi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam, thank you for having me.
Yes, Alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity, and it's the first time that I meet you face to face, and really it's an honor for you to be a guest of Salam Media on this interview. And clearly, you've come at a very, very critical time, particularly for Palestine, but also looking at the entire world, the Muslim world in turmoil at this point in time.
Indeed. And Gaza is actually changing not just the Muslim world, it's really changing the world as a whole. Well, we've been in turmoil for quite a while, and the peoples of the region have been struggling for their freedom from despotism as much as the Palestinians have been fighting for their freedom from colonialism, from Zionist colonialism. The two actually go hand in hand. The freedom of the Arabs and the Muslims and the freedom of the Palestinians. Yet, I think this time Gaza has shaken the entire world with its steadfastness, its miraculous resistance and resilience at the same time. To the extent that for the first time, we are hearing and seeing people around the world asking, what is the root of this problem? Something which not many people cared to search or understand before. But now more and more people want to know what's going on. And once they start finding out what's going on, this is good for Palestine.
Well, certainly. And obviously, we are concerned, we are deeply concerned, and we should be looking at the carnage, looking at the genocide, looking at the catastrophe that is unfolding in Gaza, the displacement of people. And we see, with the aggression and the genocide now moving more towards south, very close to the Egyptian border as well. And just, looking at it, obviously from that angle, we know that there is a humanitarian catastrophe of untold proportions, but also taking a look at it, and I know, your expertise is a lot on political thought as well. And just looking at it as a game changer from a political thought perspective, how big a game changer is Gaza going to be?
It's quite big, to the extent that some American historians and commentators resembled the 7th of October to the Tet offensive in Vietnam in 1968. It's a very interesting story, the story of the Tet offensive, because of the similarities between what happened on the 7th of October and what happened then. Now, what these Americans have said is that just like the Tet offensive changed history in Vietnam, and set the scene for the withdrawal of the Americans, the 7th of October will probably set the scene for the end of the Zionist project. And no wonder the Western world, which created Israel in the first place, and which continues to sponsor it and fund it and protect it, is panicking, is horrified at the prospect that a minority of people held in an open prison in Gaza, under siege, denied all sorts of freedoms and rights, are actually triggering this very important change in the history of the conflict.
Yes, interesting you speak about the end of the Zionist project, because this is absolutely important, because for a long time, when one looks at the world and how the world has been defined by what is termed as a new world order, and looking at Gaza and Palestine, in terms of defining now what this new world order is all about, but also in terms of looking at the changing landscape right across the entire world, the geopolitical landscape, the thought process as well. This I'm sure, and when we talk about a game changer, this is also something that we need to take cognizance of.
Indeed, and I wouldn't be surprised if future generations looked back at what's going on today and contributed or credited Gaza for changing a very unjust world order. The reason we have this suffering in Palestine, the reason we have so much injustice around the world, so much poverty, so much imbalance, is because of the nature of the world order. Hegemonic, imperialist, selfish, racist, and that's why it's actually sabotaging the globe. And Gaza now is awakening many people. The people in the American youth have been seen in video clips saying, "Thank you, Gaza, for liberating us." Gaza is awakening people to see the true nature of this world order that has resulted in the murder of millions of people around the world. So yes, it is a game changer in every sense.
Yes, and also just taking a look at it, from how the world is actually looking at what is unfolding in Palestine and in Gaza in particular. Now we know the Zionist entity has been horribly exposed. Those that have supported the Zionist entity have been horribly exposed. We've seen it with the ICJ. We've seen the case that South Africa brought to the ICJ. And just generally, when one looks at the support that the Palestinians enjoy right across the entire world, where we find a large percentage of the world population is in support. But they're also starting to come to terms with who the people of Palestine really are. They're also coming to terms with what the resistance is all about. And I think this obviously contributes to this game changer we're talking about, but also taking a look at Palestinian resistance in general, where previously, it was all about terrorism, even an organization like Hamas. The world is starting to look at Hamas very, very differently.
Well, we have a precedent in this. I mean, we will never forget that Nelson Mandela was once designated a terrorist by Margaret Thatcher, who said that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist who'd never be allowed to set foot on British soil. And this so-called terrorist soon afterwards became a world hero, champion. And he arrived in London and was given a hero's welcome. So things don't remain the same. And I think the South African experience, for people who lived that experience, and probably they are becoming less and less nowadays because so much, it's almost more than 30 years now since apartheid came to an end. But those who still remember the days of apartheid, or those who read about it, will see the striking similarities between the apartheid regime in old South Africa and the Zionist regime that is occupying Palestine. And just as apartheid came to an end, Zionism will come to an end. And that's why it's very useful to study other examples of liberation movements. There are so many aspects that are so similar. It helps to know what happened to Algeria after 132 years of French colonialism, what happened in Vietnam, what happened in various parts of the world, including South Africa.
Yes, and also I think just looking at the geopolitics and Middle Eastern politics, which you're quite an expert of as well. How has this impacted on Middle East politics?
The entire Middle East is shaking at the moment. And if the world has been shaken, the Middle East has been shaken more intensely. And the reason for this is that the masses in the Middle East have been struggling for their own freedom. The Arab masses in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and in Iraq, who took to the streets in 2011, they were shouting, the people want an end to this regime, the people want an end to occupation in Palestine. They went hand in hand because of people realized that the root problem is one and the same. And therefore, what happens as a result of this war on Gaza is that the Arab regimes, who are so despotic and corrupt, are panicking, are joining hands with the Zionists rather than lending a hand to the Palestinians, while the masses are boiling in anger and are so frustrated that they are in shackles and unable to lend the necessary support to the people of Gaza. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see another eruption in the Middle East, similar to the eruption that happened in late 2010, early 2011.
In fact, I've got an appointment, an interview a little later on. We're talking about 13 years since the fall of Hosni Mubarak. And I just want to take a step back because I know, looking at the Ikhwan, looking at the Muslim Brotherhood as well, obviously you've written extensively with regard to the Muslim Brotherhood and the Ikhwan as well, and looking at Hamas and where Hamas actually stemmed from as well. Now, we know that since the Arab Spring, the Muslim Brotherhood was neutralized in many parts right across the entire world. We've seen what had happened with Mohammed Morsi as well, the removal of Mohammed Morsi. Now, all of this, put together as well. And I think the chickens possibly are actually coming home to roost now, because this neutralization of the Muslim Brotherhood, the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, and what the Muslim Brotherhood actually, in terms of its vision for a Muslim world, for a vision for Muslim governance. All of this, one actually should bear in mind, considering, like you mentioned, the despotic Arab governments, their support for Israel. And the latest, we've seen it even to overcome what is taking place in the Red Sea with the Houthis, the support that the Arab world is giving through a road bridge corridor to ensure that they continue with business as usual, making sure that whatever trade links they have with Israel, the goods still reach Israel, while everything is blocked off on the other side through Rafah, and Palestinians are being starved where not even a drop of water is allowed in.
Well, indeed, what you have just described is the reality in the region, a reality that is causing a lot of frustration at the grassroots level. And until recently, the Muslim Brotherhood led the masses or sought to lead the masses in the endeavor for change. And that's why the Muslim Brotherhood is seen in many parts around the world as a major threat to despotism as well as to Western imperialism. Because the very reason why the Muslim Brotherhood came into existence in the first place in 1928 was to free the Muslims in the region from the shackles of colonialism when the British were in Egypt and when they were paving the way for the creation of a Zionist entity in Palestine. The Muslim Brotherhood are still there. The movement is not dead. It is suppressed, but we know from experience that it comes back. It will come back. It was hit hard in 1949, then in 1954, then in 1965. You see, and every time it came back stronger. And the reason for this is the idea that it carries. The idea is alive. The idea that these people have the right to be free, and not only have the right to be free, they have a responsibility to convey a message to the world. We are an ummah that has a message, and we cannot convey that message if we are in shackles. So we have to break the shackles. We have to be free again in order to be able to lead the world towards salvation.
And obviously, with what is unfolding, and particularly in the Muslim world, people on the ground are very, very angry. We've seen it. We've seen the protests right across. We've seen it quite recently in Jordan as well, where Israel had made this claim about breaking through that road corridor and going via Jordan, supplying goods. And we've seen the anger on the ground. I'm sure it's the same in Egypt. I'm sure it's basically possibly in the
Well,
Gulf
Egypt
countries.
is helping the Israelis impose the siege on Gaza. They've been
Right.
doing this.
Well, exactly the point. But I think just looking at it purely from a Hamas perspective. Now we know to a large extent a lot of the world has been focusing on Hamas as a military wing. They're focusing on Izzuddin Qassam, they're focusing on Islamic Jihad, but looking at Hamas as a political bureau. And I think this is where there seems to be a lack of understanding as to who Hamas really is, because Hamas has got a political bureau, but in terms of recognition, they're not getting the recognition that they deserve. Because even in the Muslim world, I think many of them are skeptical about Hamas and not giving them the due recognition they deserve.
Yeah, but this is not unique. I mean, as we've spoken earlier, all liberation movements in the history, in modern history, were designated as terrorists, were proscribed, were boycotted. I remember when I was a student in the UK a long time ago, Gerry Adams, who was the spokesperson for the IRA, or for Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, was proscribed and prevented from appearing with his true voice on British television. Margaret Thatcher decided that an actor should instead be speaking, because she didn't want the British public to hear his voice. And later on, Gerry Adams became party to the Good Friday Agreement that, at least for the time being, brought that conflict to a halt and resulted in a unity government in Northern Ireland. So we shouldn't be intimidated that they are proscribing Hamas as and are designating it as a terrorist organization. The precedent is there. But what the world now is realizing is that Hamas is not just a resistance movement. Of course, it is a resistance movement, but it was born out of a grassroots cultural social reform movement, the Ikhwan of Palestine, the Muslim Brotherhood of Palestine. And the Brotherhood, whether in Egypt or in Palestine or any other part of the world, have a program. They have a mission, and that mission derives from the Quran and the Sunnah. They are the true representatives of mainstream Islam, of the middle ground Islam, of the true Islam that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came to us with. And that's why you cannot defeat people who carry such an idea. You can weaken them, you can suppress them for a while, you can imprison them, you can kill or assassinate some of their leaders, banish some, but the idea lives on, and that idea will once again materialize in reality in the form of another project.
Dr. Azzam, I see so much positivity, coming from you as we are having this discussion. And we know at this point in time, there seems to be a lot of doom and gloom, because we are seeing these images. We see these horrific images on a day-to-day basis. We see the thousands, we see the innocent women, children being killed. We hear about, people that are starving, don't even know where the next meal is coming from. And as this genocide is unfolding, it's so easy to actually retreat into a shell and say this is all doom and gloom, and we are so negative about it. Yet I see a lot of positivity coming from just this few minutes discussion that we are obviously having. But also at the same time, you mentioned earlier on that the Zionist project, the end of the Zionist project, because we can already see it. We see the consequences for Israel, for the Zionist entity. We see public opinion in the global court of public opinion. We've already started to see how horribly exposed the Zionist entity is. And it's just a matter of time.
It is a matter of time, of course. And as I said to you earlier, colonial projects in the past came to an end. You see, with colonialism, we've seen three models. There is the model of what the white man of Europe did to the Aborigines in Australia and New Zealand and to the so-called Red Indians in America. They wiped them out, and on their relics, they established their own white man civilization. That's one option when you finish off the indigenous population. The second option is when the colonial authorities reach a point where it's no longer possible for them to continue. This is South Africa, where they went to Nelson Mandela and said to him, okay, let's find a way out. And he said, okay, there can be a way out if we do away with apartheid. So do away with apartheid and let's talk about the future. The third model is the model of Vietnam and Algeria, where no matter how long the colonial authorities remain in the country and how much pain they cause to the people, eventually they're defeated and they're driven out. So now Palestine is definitely going to end up in the second or the third model, but not the first model. We've seen the Palestinians for 100 years. They've been there, they continue to be there, they continue the resistance, they're not going away. Furthermore, this is not just an issue of the Palestinians, this is an issue for the Ummah. And as soon as the Ummah is free from all these shackles and restrictions imposed on it, that will expedite the end of this Zionist project.
Yes. And also, I think, yourself being a Palestinian, and just to look at it from a Palestinian perspective, because I've always maintained that the Palestinian people have been chosen. They have been chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to represent an ummah that is well over 2 billion strong at this point in time. And it's a handful of people. These are special people. And we say it all the time. There is no other nation that could have been chosen to do what the Palestinians do, even in terms of resistance, in terms of steadfastness, and right to see this thing right through the end. And obviously central to this is Masjid al-Aqsa for the Muslim Ummah. We know that Hamas has obviously called it the Al-Aqsa flood as well. And, if you could just take us through, what goes through a Palestinian person's mind in terms of how this actually inspires him to continue with the struggle, despite all the challenges, despite all that is happening around.
See, every Palestinian is born into this cause. My grandfather's generation resisted Zionism as well as British colonialism. My father's generation fought against Zionism. My generation, the generation of my children and my grandchildren today, they all live the cause, each in his own way, depending on whatever means that are available to him or to her. So for the Palestinians, yes, it breaks our heart what happens to our brothers in Gaza, in Al-Quds, in Nablus, in Al-Khalil, in Jenin, everywhere. Yes, it pains us what happens to them. But really, sometimes when I think about it, I feel we are really lucky because we are the vanguards, in a sense. There's a verse in the Quran that says, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you change heart, He will replace you by others who will not be like you. They will be better. We have a mission. And if we fail to carry that mission, and if we fail to struggle for that mission, Allah will just strip it from us and give it to someone else. Today, the people of Gaza, as you rightly said, are the true representatives of the Ummah in defending its existence, its very existence. And it's a miracle. It's a miracle that is causing so much panic in Washington, in London, in Paris, in Berlin, and all the other capitals of Western imperialism, because they thought this was a minority of people held in an open prison, denied water, denied food, denied medicine, denied freedom of movement, except in as much as the Israelis would allow. And yet, look at them. They're bringing Israel to its knees. They're forcing the Israelis to rethink their own project. And not only that, they are causing an uprising among world Jews. Many of them are today saying, not in our name. They are turning against Zionism, because Zionism, in its original, in its inception days, actually represented a very, very small minority of Jews. The majority of the Jews were opposed to it. Today, we are seeing a trend of an increasing number of Jews, especially the young generation, who are dissociating themselves from Zionism and from the Israel project. And this is the doing of the people of Gaza.
Well, certainly. And also, many people are saying that how is this likely to end? Now, we've seen the latest, we've seen Qatar, we've seen all the negotiations taking place. We've seen Blinken making, I think, 5 trips already to the Middle East as well. And just your thoughts, Dr. Tamimi, on Hamas obviously made certain proposals with regard to, the negotiations, the release of prisoners, all of that. Just your thoughts in terms of how this, how or what would be the ideal in terms of these negotiations and what Hamas is asking for. I'm sure it's not unreasonable, but also at the same time, we've heard just yesterday Netanyahu rejecting the Hamas proposals.
Well, look, on the long term, there can be peace and harmony among Muslims, Jews, and Christians in that part of the world, as was the case throughout centuries, only if Zionism is no more, just like when apartheid was no more. However, for the time being, on the short term, the only way out of the current war is for Israel to accept Hamas conditions. Hamas will not surrender. The people of Gaza will not surrender. 2/3 of Gaza has been completely destroyed. Almost 30,000 people, most of them women and children, have been killed. Utter devastation. An American political scientist even said recently that we've seen in Gaza punishment for the civilian population, some unseen throughout the history of humanity. Yet, no one is hoisting the white flag. The Israelis will have to accept Hamas conditions, which are complete withdrawal from Gaza, opening the crossings and allowing aid to come in, freedom of movement for the people of Gaza, then complete exchange of prisoners. All Palestinian prisoners will have to come out from Israeli detention centers because they are also hostages in exchange for the hostages that Hamas has. If the Israelis don't accept this, I don't think that the people of Gaza or Hamas will ever surrender.
And just your visit to South Africa, I'm sure you're looking forward to going around the country, and you started off yesterday. Just what sort of message have you got for the audience and obviously the people you're going to reach out to, and also people who are listening and watching us right now?
Well, I'm really delighted to have been able to come to South Africa again. In the old days, I used to come frequently here. I'm aging now. It's not as easy to travel. But my message actually is that look back at your own experience in South Africa with apartheid and compare it to what's going on in Palestine. And of course, I must mention here that the Palestinians are indebted to the South Africans. The South Africans are our heroes. Just as the Palestinian struggle once was looked at as a model for the strugglers in South Africa against apartheid, South Africa today is representing the Palestinians in the international fora. I mean, what happened at the International Court of Justice is amazing. I mean, South Africa has done what so many Muslim and Arab governments failed to do, which is a great thing indeed. And this is an invitation to look at the similarities between your plight in the old days and our current plight. It's racism we are fighting against. It's a colonial invasion by a group of people who claim to have a divine license to do to others who are unlike them whatever they deemed appropriate.
Well, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, I must say it's been an absolute pleasure, taking time out, obviously, and we do appreciate it. And really, I'm honored to to be having this discussion with you and on the airwaves of Salam Media. Jazakallah so much, really much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Azzam Tamimi was us this morning right here on News and Views on Salam Media. We're going to go for a break. We'll be back.